Thank you for watching today's message. If God is impacting your life through this ministry, join us in reaching others by investing at mosaicneo.org/give. And don't forget to share your story with us by emailing us at connect@mosaicneo.org.
Start with C.S. Lewis. He wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters. And if you're not familiar, it's a book that's, the premise is that one demon is writing letters to another demon. And the demon writing, his name is Screwtape, and he's like a senior level demon in the demon hierarchy. And he's writing to this entry level demon. And this demon down here, what he's doing is he's assigned to one human, and he's supposed to work on this guy, okay? So take the idea of like a guardian angel and just think guardian demon. This is the demon assigned to this guy, and he's kind of working the opposite angle, right? He's trying to tempt, he's trying to mess him up, he's trying to ultimately destroy this guy. And the letters are designed to help this little entry-level demon be a better tempter, okay? Now, it's fiction, obviously, okay? So he made it up. But a lot of it's based on biblical principles, so I'm really drawn to it, and some of the insights that he brings out in creative ways. Really powerful about tempting and about the way demons may operate. So I want to read you, I think, one of the most powerful paragraphs in the book for me. So just keep in mind as I'm reading this is senior level Screwtape writing to entry level demon, trying to help him be a better tempter. That's the whole point behind this. So here's what he says. Never forget that when we're dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground. Remember, enemy here is God. So I know when we see enemy in church, we're usually talking about, here it's reversed. So he's talking about God. I know we, demons, have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, it is his invention, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced at times or in ways or in degrees which he has forbidden. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that which is least natural, least reflective of its maker, and least pleasurable. An ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula. All right, so that's deep, right? That's deep. Everything C.S. Lewis wrote is deep. So did you catch what he's saying here? He's saying, hey, first of all, God invented all the pleasures on this earth. God did, not demons, God did. So good food, good drink, and good sex, God's ideas. God holds the patent to those things. So he says, that's not ours, that's God. So we're kind of working on God's territory when we do that. So the demon's saying, your job is not to create a pleasure. We're trying, we can't. But demons' job is to take those pleasures that God made at times, in ways or in degrees, which God has forbidden. That's the job of a demon. And notice good old Screwtape's argument here. He said, when we do that, when we as humans do this, when we take the things that God has made, these good things, at times or in ways or in degrees in which he didn't intend, in ways that he forbid, what happens is we have an increasing craving to an ever diminishing pleasure. That's what happens. When you get outside, when you start doing things that God says not to do, start messing with pleasures in ways that God says not to mess with, what happens is this equation of an ever-increasing desire and a craving, and your pleasure actually goes down. Nowhere is this more true than in the subject of sex. See, I think our culture tends to kind of have I don't know that our culture actually says it, but I think our culture kind of has the view that Satan invented sex. Doesn't it kind of seem like that? Like our culture thinks that Satan invented sex, and God came along like a wet blanket and just wanted to make a bunch of rules around it. You know what I'm saying? Does it kind of seem that like Satan's the expert? He's the one who knows how to do this thing, and God's like the cosmic killjoy. Just making sure none of us have too much fun, guys. You can't do that. Doesn't it kind of seem that way? And maybe even the way the church has talked about this subject has kind of lend itself to that thinking. But the truth is the exact opposite. The exact opposite. God is the inventor and the expert on sex. Any rules he makes are designed not to restrict or reduce pleasure, but to maximize it. Let me say that again. Any rules God makes around the subject are designed not to reduce or restrict pleasure, but to maximize it. Satan's the one out to destroy pleasure. Satan ultimately wants an increasing craving for a diminishing pleasure. And by the way, if you've ever been caught up in any kind of sexual sin, I think you could say, yep, that's what happens. So let me make a bold claim. I'm going to start with a bold claim. Usually I wait till later to make bold claims, but I'm going to start with one. I believe that the person who follows God's ways when it comes to their sex lives, like if they chose to say, I'm going to live my whole life the way God wants me to, they're going to end up in their life overall more satisfied and more fulfilled in their sex life than the person who says, screw it, I'm going to do whatever I want. Did you catch that? I'm actually claiming that the person who says, I'm going to do this God's way, that over time they're going to have more fulfillment and more satisfaction than the person who chooses to do whatever they want, because this person over here doing whatever they want, they're going to have an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. And this person will find satisfaction. Now, maybe you doubt that, and you're allowed. But all I just said, by the way, all I just said is I think God knows what he's talking about when it comes to sex. That's all I said. So disagree with that, whatever. But listen, okay, let's be real then, because I can joke about that all I want, but let's be real. Some of us sitting in this room, you look at the commands that God has made about sex and you go, that doesn't make any sense to me. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like that's, if we could be real in church and not totally be fake, some of you would look at the rules and go, I don't get that. I don't get that. It seems old-fashioned. It seems like out of place in our day and age for those to be like the rules that God made about sex. And I get it. But I just want to propose to you, if you're sitting here and you're actually being real in your head right now saying, yeah, that's me. I kind of feel like some of the rules are a little bit, a little restrictive. And I don't get some of the stuff that God says. Okay, I just want to propose to you. That God maybe knows some things about sex that you don't. That's all I want to say. Like maybe there's a spiritual component to sex that we don't understand fully. Because God made it, right? So we look at the physical act of sex, and then we look at God's rules and we go, this doesn't make any sense. But what if you could see the behind the scenes, the spiritual aspect, the spiritual component of sex? If you could see that, I bet you'd go, oh, okay, that makes a whole lot more sense. So I'm just saying that I feel like there's another component to this that we don't know about, we don't understand, we don't see the details to. So when God makes the rules, he's doing it for our good, not to restrict us, not to reduce our pleasure, but to maximize it. Now your next thought might be, well, why didn't he tell us? I don't know. My theory is that he wanted us to live by faith, but it would have been cool for him to be like, hey, by the way, here's why. But he doesn't. He hints at it. He moves us towards it. There's some language in the Bible that lends us to believe that, hey, there's more going on here than just a physical act. There is, but he doesn't fully explain it. So that's just what I want to say to you. If you're looking at some of the stuff God says about sex and you're just really feeling like, man, that doesn't make sense, I just want to say maybe you should say, I bet the one who created this probably knows some details I don't know, and maybe that's why he made the rules that he did. So my premise today, as we dive into this subject, is that God knows more about sex than we do, and shouldn't be a controversial statement. By the way, that's my premise every week. Not that God knows more about sex, but that God knows more about everything than we do. I feel like it's important to say that today, though. It's just important for me to say it. God knows more than we do. And by the way, here's the crazy part for me. If you did a study in the Bible on sex, let's just say, hey, I'll do anything to get you into the Bible. So if you did a study, say, I'm just going to study the sex in the Bible, you'd find out that the Bible is overwhelmingly pro-sex. It really is. It really is. Much of what the Bible has to say about sex is actually positive. Did you know there's an entire book of the Bible written about the sexual relationship between a husband and a wife? Did you know that? You're like, what? Yeah, I was going to not tell you what it was to make you look for it. But I'll just tell you, it's either Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, depending on which translation you're using. And like this book is so racy that I'm going to use that word intentionally. It's so racy that in Jewish tradition, men were not allowed to read it until they were 30. 30, not 13. You didn't hear me wrong. I said 30. I was only allowed to read this book 6 years ago, okay? And what's even more messed up, if you study it, I have an entire textbook from my college. I was showing people this, so I was proud of it. I was like, look at my textbook on Song of Songs. There's pictures, and they're inappropriate. There is. I was all excited. I'm like, look at this. In my Christian college, there's this book. But it's huge. It's like this thick of a book. And there's all these ways that Christians have tried to read this book that like allegorize it, that push away from the very obvious fact that this book is straight up just about sex. And because Christians are just made uncomfortable about it. But if you just read it for what it is, you almost, by the way, to coach you through, if you do go to read that, don't do it right now. Can you just wait? Wait till you get home. You almost do have to, this is going to be the first time you've ever heard this advice. You almost have to read it with like a dirty mind. Because a lot of it's imagery, so you're going to be like, if you know what I mean. At the end of each verse, you're right. In that sense, it'll be the only time you're allowed to be like a 13-year-old boy. But it works. It works. Matter of fact, here, I believe that the Bible is so pro-sex. I actually think instead of the Bible being old-fashioned, I actually think the Bible was ahead of its time when it comes to sex. And let me show you. So here's what I'm about to do. I just want to explain this thoroughly. I'm going to read the Bible to you. That's what I'm going to do right now. So if it's awkward, it's your fault. This is the book of Proverbs, by the way. This is not the Song of Solomon. I'm going to leave all that out. You can explore that book on your own. But the same guy wrote this. He liked sex. His name was Solomon. It was true. All right, so here it is. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love. Just reading the Bible to you guys. Now, if you've never read these verses before, you're like, what? That's in the Bible? See, you should read it more. Guys, you should read it more. Now, for me, the coolest part in these verses is not the obvious part, and the obvious part is cool. By the way, that's a command, gentlemen. Command. And let me point out, I just want to clarify, the word always means... Stop. Whatever you're doing right now, stop. It means like never get to the point where you stop doing it. It doesn't mean always, so not in church, okay? So stop. Okay. If this is your first time here, I already apologize, and I haven't even told you the best part of the verse, and I really do think this is the best part of the verse. So it's the last sentence. May you always be captivated by her love. This sentence kind of jacked me up this week, so I was like, man, that's a really cool sentence. It's already kind of poetic, and it sounds romantic, right? It sounds like something like a woman would be like, oh, I want that. Here's the crazy part. So I started looking up like the Hebrew and stuff, and I wanted to go dig down deep, and it was really this word that I was after. And it's this word, shagah. So I started looking it up, and again, I thought I was going to find this like romantic thing, but this word is not romantic. This word is almost exclusively used in a negative sense in the Bible. In a negative sense. It means to make a mistake by going too far, like to err in the extreme. Literally translated, to reel under the influence of wine. So this verse actually means to get drunk. To get drunk. Okay, now, that'll mess you up a little bit because I will tell you, the Bible does say for us to not get drunk, but here's what this verse just did. It just used a word that means to get drunk, and it told you to do that in your sexual relationship with your spouse. You're not blown away yet. Okay, so what it's saying is that you are this is a command for you to drink so deeply from that well that you're a little tipsy, okay? Like you're almost to the point where like, I can't handle any more of this. Are you catching what I'm saying? If you know what I mean. Do I have to? It's good. You get it, okay, good. It's saying there's no such thing as too much. Now that's weird because you've heard the saying, everything in moderation, right? But what this is saying is when it comes to your sexual relationship inside of marriage, there is no such thing as, no, moderation, no. Go to the extreme. Find out how drunk on love you can get. That's what it says. And by the way, if you're sitting here going, well, love's not sex. Listen, read the whole chapter. I promise it's talking about sex. Just read the whole verse. It's talking about sex. I promise. Okay, this is crazy for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think the reputation of the Bible is that it's prudish, and that it's, old-fashioned. But these are some pretty racy commands right here. The second reason I think this is crazy is because Rihanna 10 years ago, sung a song called Drunk on Love. Beyonce, sung a song called Drunk in Love. If you're into country, a guy named Brett Eldridge, I don't know if he's cool or not, I don't know anything about country, but he sung a song, Drunk on Your Love. I feel like every other country song is something like that, right? You can probably think of more. But the kind of language is already used in our culture, isn't it? To get drunk on love. It's actually used a lot. And I think historically, Christians have kind of looked down on their nose and been like, can't believe they would use that as an example of love. But I want to say, listen, they're behind. Solomon was saying this thousands of years before Beyonce. So Beyonce caught up to Solomon when she sung this song, is what I'm saying is he was ahead of his time. He deserves royalties. She should pay Solomon. He's already rich, but he deserves more. Drunk on love. So let me ask you, if you're married, would you describe your sexual relation? Don't answer this out loud. Listen, just so you know, we've already had more fun in church than most people ever have, today. But if you guys start laughing at things that I accidentally say today, we may never get out of here. So, and don't answer out loud, you have to answer in your head. Okay, so, if you're married, would you describe your sexual relationship with your spouse as intoxicating? Are you drinking so deeply from that fountain that you are kind of reeling under the influence? Would you say you're drunk on his love, drunk on her love? Is that where you're at? Can I guess? I'm gonna guess no. For most of us, some of you need to high five. Good job. If you're newly married, I hope you're high-fiving because that's usually where we drink deeply from that well. But I'm going to guess that most of us, I don't know that that's where you're at. And the reason is because this is a difficult thing. It's actually not easy to have this kind of sexual relationship even with your spouse. You don't accidentally have a good, healthy sexual relationship with your spouse. You know that? You certainly aren't going to accidentally be intoxicated on each other's love. You're not going to wake up one morning and go, oh my gosh, man, we just have such a good sex life. You're not going to do that. It's not going to accidentally happen. There's going to need to be some intentionality behind this. There's actually going to be some hard work, which maybe doesn't sound like it fits with a subject like this, but you do have to do some hard work in order for this to happen. So what I want to do today is I want to look at a passage in the book of 1 Corinthians, where sex is actually addressed specifically. Now, quick background on the letter. This is a letter that a guy named Paul wrote to a church in the city of Corinth. And in that time, in that culture, they were just as obsessed with sex as we are now, and they were just as messed up and warped when it comes to sex as we are now. We tend to think that like we're worse or we're like way up, but it is the same. The city had all kinds of weird stuff going on. And what happened is the church is looking at all the stuff that's happening in the culture, and they're starting to get worried because there's a lot of evil around that subject. There's a lot of warped things happening that are like obviously evil. And the church is like, what do we do with that? And I think we could say the same thing, right? I think everybody in here would acknowledge, no matter where you are, even if you're not a Christian, you could say, hey, there's a lot of evil around the subject of sex in our culture today. There's a lot. There's a lot of messed up stuff that happens around this subject. So the church writes a letter to Paul and says, hey, what do we do with this? It's so messed up. Should we push away from this subject completely? They're actually asking, what do we do with sex, Paul? What do we do with this? We live in a culture that's so messed up. What do we do with it? And Paul answers, which is really cool. I wish the church historically had read his answer here, because it's a good answer. It's a good answer. So I want to read it. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I'm going to read it in the Message version, which, by the way, I don't normally do that. I usually use the New Living Translation, the NLT. But the Message, I don't recommend reading this version all the time, but sometimes because it goes away from the original language here and there. But sometimes it's really enlightening, especially with a passage. If you're familiar with the passage, it can kind of shine a new light on it and kind of bring some stuff to life. So I wanted to read it in the Message version. Really think it's good. So starting at verse 1, Message doesn't really do, does that tell you how weird it is? It doesn't even really do verses, so I'm just going to start in verse 1. We'll end in verse 5. I don't know where we are in the middle. All right. Now, down to the questions you asked me about in your letter to me. First, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Certainly, but only within a certain context. It is good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but sex is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world full of sexual disorder. Okay, so right here we have the biblical command on sex, like the biblical command on sex. And this is the part in the sermon where I, as a pastor, start to, this is like the scary part for me. I start to kind of do this thing in my own head. I have this like internal dialogue, and I just want to, I don't know, maybe it's scary for you, but I want to share it with you, of this internal dialogue that I have as I look at this and say, okay, so the Bible just said sex is supposed to be had inside of marriage. That's where it belongs. That's like the biblical command. It's supposed to be had inside of marriage. God created sex, and the context for that act is marriage. And it even says, it's so powerful, your sexual drives are so powerful that like they need something to contain them, and marriage is strong enough to contain them. Whew. So like, what happens is I start to like kind of think like, okay, I'm going to talk to myself here. Like, Adam, there are lots of people sitting here who are going to look at you, and you're going to say that that's what I'm supposed to do. They're going to look at you and say, not only are you stupid, but you're like crazy. Like, that's foolish, maybe even a little dangerous to say that that's what you believe. And then I'd be over here. True. I know that reading these verses and saying, I believe that. Some of you are going to look at me and say I'm crazy. But here's the deal. My deep conviction is that this is God's word. That yes, a guy named Paul wrote this 2,000 years ago, but I actually have this crazy belief that God somehow worked through him, and the Bible calls it to be like inspired, that God breathed through this guy, and that these are not Paul's words, but this is actually God speaking to us. And if I believe the Bible on other things, like, salvation, if I believe that the Bible actually tells me how to get to heaven when I die, shouldn't I believe that? Can I trust it for that? Whatever. But listen, dude, it's 2019. It's 2019. You expect these people to be able to do this? Let's just talk about a practical level. Sex only to be had inside of marriage in 2019? This in 2019? Really? I can't go to the grocery store without seeing an article on the front of a magazine that says 5 ways to blow my partner's mind and how to have an open relationship and not get hurt, right? Like, I can't pull my phone out and not be one click away from some kind of sexual image or some kind of sexual something. What you're proposing, you're putting these people in a position that they're never going to succeed. They can't do it. It's impossible. Yep. True. I'm not saying it's easy. Matter of fact, I actually think this is impossible. It is. But listen, the Bible gives us commands that are impossible all the time, right? Just look at Jesus. Jesus would walk up to a guy who can't walk and say, hey, get up. His legs would work. He'd tell him to do something, but that was impossible. He'd walk up to a guy who's blind and say, see. He told Peter, hey, get out of the boat and walk on water. He gave commands that were impossible all the time. But the key was that you wouldn't be able to do it without him. You have to trust God to get sex right. I actually think it's designed to the point where you are actually going to have to trust him in order to do what this is saying. So yeah, I'd put this in the category of impossible, but we're still called to it. Okay, so you're saying you expect people to believe that sex is only to be had inside the context of marriage. And that not only is it wrong outside of that context, but it's dangerous and damaging in ways that we don't even understand. Yes. And here's why. Because if I start cutting pieces out of the Bible, I don't know where to stop. I don't. If I say, you know what, Paul, you didn't know what you were talking about in 1 Corinthians 7. I don't know where to stop then. And if I start to say, hey, certain things in the Bible I like, certain things in the Bible I don't like, I'll do this, I'm not going to do this, I think this is right, I think this is wrong, then basically what I'm doing is I'm setting myself up as a higher authority than God and saying, hey, God, that was cool. Like, I like what you're thinking here, but we've moved past this now. Like, I just put myself above God, and I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there. So, do you like what happens inside my head? Sometimes I think that happens almost every week. I just shared it with you this time. Because I know this is crazy. We're a church for people who don't think church is for them. And I'm going to say, wait a minute, this is really what you believe? Yep. We may look really hip and cool, but we actually have some pretty old school, deep-seated beliefs. This is the major restriction on sex in the Bible. Sex is to be had inside of marriage. Outside of that context, it becomes an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. Damage we don't know, don't understand. Soul-level damage that we don't see. Now, here's what happens. Paul switches gears. So first he says, hey, this is the context, and then he jumps inside the context and he starts talking about sex inside the context. So it gets interesting. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy the wife and the wife seeking to satisfy the husband. So the idea behind sex, what the Bible says about sex, is this not about self-fulfillment, but self-sacrifice. That's actually the point. That sex is not about taking, but about giving. So the overall idea is that you're giving of yourself, not taking for yourself. Matter of fact, I would say any sex that has the feel of taking rather than giving is damaging. The flavor of sex is supposed to be a giving one, not a taking one. And I think that's really the main thing our society gets wrong about it. Our society thinks that sex is about what you get. Our society thinks that sex is about fulfilling my needs, my desires. And the Bible says, actually, no. It's about fulfilling the desires and the needs of your spouse. So another question I just want to ask you. If you're married, are you seeking to satisfy your spouse? Are you giving of yourself, not taking for yourself? Does your sex life have the feel of mutual giving? What's your attitude towards it? Now, keep that question in mind. He keeps going. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. That's why I love this version. Marriage is the decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out. Isn't that cool? Some of you hate that, but isn't that cool? Now, I've preached on sex quite a few times, so I've been lead pastor for like 8 years. I preached on it a bunch. I was going back through some of my old sermons. I was worse at this a long time ago. But one of the things I try to include in every single sermon on this, just about every single sermon, is this observation. I've quoted it so many times that I think it's mine now. I think originally it might have been Craig Groeschel's, but I've said it enough that it's just my quote now. I've commandeered it. But it's so important. So if you've heard me preach on sex before, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is familiar, but it's so important. So men, God created men and women different. Men need to feel connected in the bedroom in order to connect outside the bedroom. Women need to feel connected outside of the bedroom in order to connect in the bedroom. In case there's any confusion here, by bedroom, we're talking about sex. Just so it's not just being in the room, we're talking about sex, okay? Just want to eliminate any mild confusion around that. This is massively important for you to know. Or if you already knew it, it's massively important for you to remember. That God created husbands and wives with desires that are in like the opposite order. Isn't that crazy? That he actually kind of flipped things. And he said, okay, so guys are going to need to feel connected in the bedroom in order for them to want to connect outside the bedroom, but I'm going to make women kind of the opposite, so they need to feel connected outside the bedroom in order to want to connect inside the bedroom. Now, you can look at God and go, what the heck, man? Like, why'd you do that? Or you can realize that he did this on purpose because he wanted to create a situation where we had to serve each other for it to work. He built the machine in such a way that we have to serve each other or this thing falls apart instantly, right? And it's kind of like, so remember if you were here for the first week, we talked about the crazy cycle. Remember the respect and love thing? When she doesn't feel loved, she doesn't respect him. And when he doesn't feel respected, he doesn't love her. I would say the same thing can happen here, right? So guys can say, well, if she doesn't love me inside the bedroom, I'm not going to love her outside the bedroom. And she can say, if he's not going to love me outside the bedroom, I'm not going to love him inside the bedroom. And you can see how this could go round and round and round. It can be a cycle of, if you meet my needs, I'll meet yours. Both say it and both are frustrated. And distance is created. It's kind of like one of those it's a game of tug of war where you're just going to keep going further and further and further apart. But that's not the way God created for marriage to work. We're supposed to choose to serve each other. to choose to outdo each other in meeting each other's needs. It's now, if you did that, if that was your strategy, is like, hey, this is a competition to see who can meet each other's needs more. What if you turned marriage into that? That you wanted to win at that game. Not to demand that your needs be met, but to try and overwhelm them by meeting theirs. Then all of a sudden it's this upward spiral. And it gets better and better and better. That's how God created marriage to work. If you don't put the machine together like that, if there's not a mutual self-sacrificing going on, the thing falls apart. So men, how can you improve pursuing your wife outside of the bedroom? What does that look like? Women, how can you improve pursuing him inside the bedroom? What does that look like? You know what you should do if you're married? You should have a conversation about this. And that's weird, isn't it? The fact that I have to say that, like, you guys talk about soccer schedules, what you're going to eat, where you're going to go this coming weekend. But you know what you strangely don't talk about? Your sex lives. Why? Isn't it weird? That maybe you do. I mean, if you do, awesome, good. But most of us, I feel like the reason is because we kind of put it like in a different category. Like it's not real life, it's something else. And you kind of put it over there and you just hope it goes okay. And we talk about all the other stuff, but we don't talk about that. I just want to propose, drag that thing out here and let's talk about that. Have a conversation. But here's what I want. Like, when I say conversation, you hear fight. It's not what I said. So here's what I want. I want you to ask the question how you can do better in pursuing your spouse in whatever context they need. And you just listen. Now, you got to do a real good job shutting your mouth and listening to them saying, hey, how can I do better at pursuing you either inside or outside of the bedroom? How can I do better? Listen to them. Don't roll your eyes. Don't go, oh, here we go again. Don't do that. Listen. And try to find a way where you work on you. You're not here to stand up for your rights, like that verse said. That's not what you're doing. You're not on some campaign. You're trying to improve your ability to do this. And if you have that attitude, if you listen, you serve, and you change, it gets better. Man, isn't it weird? Like, it's almost like all the sermons in this series have the same theme to them. It's crazy. It's almost like somebody thought that through. All right, now, I was going to say we get to the best part. It's all been fun. These are some of my favorite. This is just crazy. So here's what Paul says. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it and if it's for the purposes of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. Then come back together again. A command, again. By the way, he means sex. Just want to say that again. Satan has an ingenious way of tempting us when we least expect it. Did you catch this? This is a command. This is one of the craziest commands in the Bible. Again, considering the way people view the Bible on sex. It just said it's not okay to not have sex inside of marriage. Did you catch that? So it's a reversal of the command. Yes, God says sex is to be had inside of marriage, but then he says, have it. Commanded to have it. And it seems like Paul's talking about frequency here, doesn't it? Like, only come together like, hey, it's okay to abstain. It's permissible. You're allowed to. For a period of time, so there's a time limit on it. You have to both agree to it. And the reason is for prayer and fasting. When's the last time you used that as your excuse? You don't, right? You're praying. I get worried about that too. Like, now I've given you a legitimate excuse. Liar. You don't have a headache and you're not praying. But then he says, hey, come back together again. So here's what, and then he tags this little line on the end. Because the enemy, our enemy, he's after you in this area. So basically what he just said is that the best defense against sex outside of marriage is sex inside of marriage, right? Isn't that what he just said? He just said, hey, listen, you can come apart for a minute. You can have some times where you guys take a break but get back together because, man, the best defense against an invasion into your marriage from the outside in this subject is to make sure that inside your marriage, it's going good. That's what he said. So If you're newer here, you've never heard this before, but one of our values, I won't call it a core value because we don't put it on the website or anything like that, but one of our values here is that we want to be a church where the married couples have sex a lot. Again, it's not on the website. You're like, wait a minute, I didn't see that. It's our 9th core value. It's hidden. I actually used to joke, if you've been here a while, I used to joke that I wanted to be the church in town that had the most sex. Not really sure how we'd keep track of that, what the scoreboard would be. Even if we kept track, nobody else would. But the reason is because I really feel like this is hugely, if we could get this, listen, if this is true, if sex inside of marriage is the best defense against sex outside of marriage. And by the way, I just want to throw all kind of sexual disorder into that. I'm not just talking about the affair that happens. I'm talking about porn. I'm talking about all the kind of stuff that can happen that can mess your sexual life up. If you're having sex with your spouse in a way that is satisfying to both of you, at a frequency that's satisfying to both of you, I really feel like it is like building the wall around your marriage. It will protect it from the inside out. And if you don't, I feel like you're weak. And that's what this says, right? Because it says Satan's looking for a way to mess you up. He's going to come in and tempt when you least expect it, so get back together. Get back together. We live in a sex-obsessed culture. You cannot go anywhere without it being thrown in your face. And if our greatest weapon against sex in the wrong context is sex in the right context, go after it, man. This is the best command ever, right? So listen, sex is a powerful gift from God. God made it. And I want to say, if you screwed this up, no, I'm going to change that. You have. There's not a person sitting here that hasn't messed this up. There's not. I usually don't use all-inclusive language. Maybe there's one. No. Every single one of us has messed this up. You've done something you weren't supposed to. You've looked at something you're not supposed to. You've been in conversations like you shouldn't. There's something. You've been outside of this. You have. We all have. Nobody's sitting here clean. The awesome thing, man, I want to read these verses to you. This is the awesome thing about Christianity. Because I think we all know what it's like to carry guilt, to carry shame around from messing this up, to carry it's like carrying a weight around from messing this up. But look at 1 Peter starting 2:24. He Jesus personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. By his wounds you are healed. Once you were like sheep who wandered away, but now you have turned to your shepherd, the guardian of your souls. I love that. I love that. The guardian of your souls. You've messed this up. Maybe I should change it from past tense to current. Maybe you are messing this up. But here's the beautiful part. I think for hundreds of years, the church has tried to use guilt and shame as weapons against this. But that's the problem. Those weapons don't work against this. Those are the weapons that actually lead into this. So this is the best part. If you're a Christian, you're free. Free. Jesus said he took this onto himself on the cross, all of it. All of your sexual sin, he took it onto himself. And by his wounds, you were healed. That he took this onto himself. There's this story that I didn't have time to go into. It's in John chapter 8 of this woman who's caught in the very act of adultery. So it wasn't even a question if she had messed this up. She was just messing this up a couple of minutes ago. They drop her in front of Jesus and they say we're supposed to stone her because she screwed this up, Jesus. And according to the Old Testament, that's what was supposed to happen. They were supposed to throw rocks at her till she was dead. And they all had big rocks in their hands let's do this. What do you think, Jesus? And Jesus says, you probably know the story. If you're without sin, cast the first stone. Go ahead. And they all walk away. Now, who was the only person in that situation who could have? He could have found a big one and said, all right. But he said, no. What did he say to her? Hey, who condemned you? Nobody? Neither do I. Go and sin no more. Now, that's a crazy thing for Jesus to say, because according to Mosaic law, she should have been killed. The only reason he can say, neither do I, is because he knows that in a couple of months, he's going to die for that. He's banking on that. He's putting her on credit, saying, it's okay, I got that. I got that. I'm going to die. Those rocks that were supposed to hit you, I'm going to take them in my hands and in my feet. I'm going to take a spear to the side for that. You're clean. Now go and sin no more. Her motivation was not shame. He didn't get down on her face and say, man, what is wrong with you? He didn't do any of that. He didn't throw any shame, any guilt. He did the exact opposite. Say, you're free. You're free. I died for all of it. And that's what I want you to know today. If you're a Christian, you're free. He paid for all of it. Stop carrying that around. Drop it at the foot of the cross and leave it. He paid for it. He paid a high price for it. You're clean. Go. You're free. And today, if you're stuck in it, he still paid for it. He knew you were going to do this before, you know that. It was 2,000 years ago. He knew all your sins before then. I would hope that this is motivation for you to get out of it. Not some excuse, well, he's going to die, he died for it anyways. Not that, man. No, you don't get it if that's where you're at. The God of the universe chose to come down and die for you and pay for the whole thing. Man, that should be motivation to live how he wants you to live. Come out of it. If you need help, find it. Get out of it. But this is the best news ever. And this is the subject where we probably need it the most. Jesus died for all of it. You're free, you're clean. Now you can live the way he wants you to.